Dividend investing can be a great way to earn income while reducing the volatility of your portfolio, but if you don't understand how to use them properly, the odds of actually living off of dividends is much harder. For example, if you bought a company like Apple that has a 0.44% dividend yield, that means if you had $1,000 invested in Apple for an entire year, you would have earned a solid $4.40. So if you wanted to reach the median salary in the US of $60,000 to live off of dividends alone, if it were just Apple, you would need $13.6 million. But the reason that Apple has such a low dividend payout is because they're known as a growth stock, which means that they would rather use the money to reinvest back into the company to grow it as much as possible rather than giving out a large dividend payment to the shareholders. And so when it comes to growth stocks, they are known to be more volatile, where companies that pay dividends are often more balanced and financially stable, resulting in less price fluctuation. So for a high dividend paying stock like Altria, they have an 8% dividend yield, which means to reach $60,000 per year from just this stock, you would need to invest $750,000. Sounds much better, but who wants to put all their money into one stock, and yet alone, a stock like this is not going to grow as well. For example, over the past 10 years, Apple stock grew at an average rate of 24.74% per year, which that includes the dividend yield, so even if you took dividends as income, your investment in Apple would still have grown over 24% per year, which is wild. But it's really important to understand that if you invested into high dividend paying stocks like Altria over the past 10 years, their stock grew at an average rate of 6.27%, which means if you took the dividends as income, the actual investment would have declined close to -2% per year. And so just to emphasize how important this is for you, if you invested $100,000 in Apple 10 years ago, even if you took the dividends as income, you would have grown $100,000 to $859,000, which is a $760,000 increase in wealth. But on the other end, if you put $100,000 into Altria for 10 years and you took the dividends as income, you would have turned $100,000 into roughly $82,000, resulting in a loss of $18,000. So even though a company like Altria pays a high dividend, you need to understand that the value of growth underlying the investment is far more important. That right there is exactly why index funds are among the best investments you can make in the stock market, at least in my own personal opinion, but you're going to be able to get exposure to many different companies all within one purchase. So instead of taking on the risk of only buying Apple, you may instead buy the S&P 500 that tracks 500 of the largest US companies, where this investment has averaged a 12.94% annual return over the past 10 years and currently offers a 1.26% dividend yield. If that dividend sounds too low for you, instead of getting a dividend stock like Altria, instead you could get a more dividend focused index fund like a popular one that is the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, ticker SCHD. Now this fund tracks the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index, which means it contains 100 of the strongest dividend paying stocks in the market, such as Home Depot and Verizon. This one fund alone has averaged an 11.59% annual return over the past 10 years, while averaging a 3.34% dividend yield over the past 12 months. Now I'll go over my strategy for dividend investing later in the video, but by using these strong index funds, you're actually going to be able to capture qualified dividends. To simply break it down for you, most regular dividend paying companies that are US based can be considered for qualified dividends, which means the dividends are taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income. So the rates for qualified dividends are at the long-term capital gains rate with the brackets of 0, 15, and 20%, where investments like real estate trust companies or funds that use option strategies to provide the high income, they're going to be charged at ordinary income in the tax brackets of 10 to 37%. And this is really important to understand because if you're going to be able to capture qualified dividends in the year of 2024, if you are single with the standard deduction of $14,600, that means if qualified dividends were your only source of income, you could earn up to $61,000 without paying any taxes, which to make the investments considered qualified, you must hold a specific stock or ETF for more than 60 days during a specific 121-day holding period that begins 60 days before the ex-dividend date. The way I like to view this is to just buy and hold the investment long, don't try to sell it and play around with it, and the dividends you'll earn, you'll reap the much better tax rates. Knowing that, let's now go over how much you actually need to live off dividends. When it comes to figuring out how much you need to live off of dividends, there is a very simple calculation that only requires two numbers. That is first your target goal of what your dividend income is going to be, and then you're going to take that and divide it by the estimated dividend yield that you are likely to receive. So let's say you wanted to live off of $60,000 of dividend income using the S&P 500 at a 1.26% yield. yield, and on a calculator that would be 0.0126, which computes to be $4.7 million you would need. It's obviously a lot of money that you would need, so if you want to reduce that amount, you could actually add in a more stable dividend index fund like SCHD or any other ones that you favor, and by doing that, you could then increase the average dividend yield that you would be achieving across your entire portfolio. For example, let's just say that you split 75% with the S&P 500 VOO, and then 25% SCHD within your taxable account. That would result in a 1.78% dividend yield, where $60,000 divided by 0.0178 means you would then need $3.37 million, which is at least better, but that's still a lot. And then if you split 50-50, that would be an average 2.3% dividend yield that would require $2.6 million to earn that $60,000 per year. Or if you went 25% S&P, 75% dividend fund, that would be an average 2.8% dividend yield that would require a $2.13 million portfolio. Or if you went all in on SCHD with that 3.34% dividend yield, that means you would actually need a $1.76 million portfolio. So because the S&P 500 is considered the stock market benchmark, and I believe should be the foundation to a portfolio, actually achieving a point to live off of dividends with the S&P 500 in a taxable account is going to make things much harder. But if you're determined to live off of dividends and want a higher yield than that, you can alter more to the dividend funds and even dividend paying stocks that will allow you to have more dividend payments rather than seeing more of the growth like the S&P 500. But if you are interested to learn more about strong dividend paying companies, you may want to consider hitting the subscribe button for future content like this, which by hitting that button, it's super easy and could provide significant value for you over time. But after that, to further your dividend investment options, you may want to look into the dividend aristocrats, which are among the highest paying dividend companies that are part of the S&P 500 and have increased their dividends in each of the past 25 years and have proven to do so even through significant periods of recessions. Where you can see the companies here have dividend yields with many of them above 2 to 3% that you may want to consider. Just understand that typically the more that you are going to be aiming for dividends, the more that you are likely to be missing out on growth. So although it's completely a personal decision, for me, I still have many more years for my investments to grow. So right now, I strongly prefer to go towards growth rather than dividends. I'll also mention that there are high dividend income ETFs that can produce 8 to 10% dividend yields, and they are safer than picking just one stock, but the likeliness for investments like that to outpace inflation are very difficult to find, and you're going to have to pay ordinary income taxes because of how they're structured. For example, one interesting combination I like is JPI and JPQ that combined average roughly an 8.4% dividend yield, where JPI tracks the S&P 500 index, where JPQ tracks the NASDAQ 100 index, where both of them each pay out a monthly income through the stock dividends, but more so their option strategies. So these two funds are relatively new to the market, but so far have done very well, where JPI since 2020 has averaged a 3.15% annual return, and JPQ since 2022 has averaged a 15.05% return. But don't forget, the dividends here are taxed as ordinary income, which is going to be much higher than qualified dividends. So knowing that, here is my strategy to dividend investing. Although at a young age, growth should be the top focus, it is appealing to diversify with a portion of dividend investments. The biggest incentive I like about building a dividend investment portfolio within taxable accounts is because I view them more as the defensive portion of my investment, where the dividend fund for SCHD only has an 8% overlap with the S&P 500, which the worst year for SCHD over the past 10 years was down only 5.5%, where the S&P 500 was down negative 18%. So by owning a dividend fund like SCHD, it allows you to gain exposure outside of the large tech stocks that are in the S&P 500 while reducing the likeliness of losing money in the moment. In fact, the difference if you had $100,000 invested, this means the worst year it would have declined to roughly $95,000, where a high growth fund may have declined 40%, putting it down to $60,000. Of course, this means nothing if you just hold on to the investment and don't sell, but if you did have to sell because of economic conditions, if you're doing this at the time of lows when it is down 40%, that is the worst time that you could be selling, and if anything, you would want to be buying. But I will say something extremely important to understand is that if you're investing into retirement accounts like the Roth IRA, if you have at least 10 to 20 and even up to 40 years to invest, the entire purpose of the Roth IRA is for future growth, so going towards growth rather than dividend income investment would be ideal. And like I said, that's because of the known fact that growth stocks tend to outperform dividend paying stocks over time. So the plan I have with my Roth IRA is to invest solely for growth, and then when the time comes when I'm at the age of 59 and a half or above, when I want an income, I could then swap the investments without paying taxes to any other dividend income opportunities, and then I could take that as income, and that would be completely tax-free. Let's just say a combination of the S&P 500 VOO, SCHD, high income earning ones like JPI and JPQ, I may average a 5% dividend yield with a 10% average annual return. This type of portfolio would easily be able to outpace inflation, and with that 5% average dividend yield, that means that you would need a $1.2 million Roth IRA. If that sounds like a lot, it is completely worth going after because the dividends that you'll be able to take will be completely tax-free no matter the type of investments you choose, and because the account would have been built up this large, you can continue growing it, and the dividend income would last your entire lifetime while still growing with the account. Which if you're 30, all it takes is $583 per month, which is roughly $145 per week. If you can consistently do this and get the stock market average with an investment like the S&P 500, based on the numbers, by the eligible age of 59 and a half, you would have a large enough portfolio to live tax-free off dividends forever. Of course, there are factors to consider like inflation, so I don't recommend relying only on this account for retirement, but to understand how important it is to start as soon as you can and realize the tax-free dividend income that you could be getting here with solid options. Now, if you want to see exactly how I allocate my investments and other exclusive content of mine, check out the Patreon in the description below. Which, while you're at it, if you are interested to get started on a new platform, the one I use for dividend investing and have linked to a high yield savings account is SoFi, where you can get $25 worth of free stock when you deposit at least $25. Or if you want to get their high yield savings account, you can get up to $325 depending on how much you direct deposit. I'll also leave other relevant videos I've created in the description below for you. And as always, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and notifications button for future content like this.